According to the UN, 25 million people in one country are in need of humanitarian aid and assistance. It's not Ukraine or Gaza, but Sudan. Why has the world forgotten about the violence there and all those who are suffering? Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. Fierce fighting erupted in Sudan in April last year. Millions have been displaced, killed, or face famine. So, why isn't the international community doing more?
Despite the numbers affected and the ongoing violence, Sudan is all but the forgotten conflict.
It's been extraordinarily difficult to get media attention to Sudan, and we have all in our different ways tried. But I don't think there's anywhere quite so tragic in the world today as Sudan.
The fighting is essentially the result of two generals vying for power. Former President Omar Elbashir was toppled in a coup in 2019 after nearly 3 decades in power. Another coup followed in 2021. General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, the head of the Sudanese armed forces and the leader of the Rapid Support Forces, General Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, better known as Hamedi, disagreed about the future direction of the country, and violence erupted again in April last year. The fighting has been concentrated around the capital Khartoum and in the western Darfur region, where the RSF has taken significant territory. If Darfur sounds familiar, it may be because hundreds of thousands of people were killed there in 2003, and the then President Bashir was indicted for war crimes and genocide. Part of the militia group that aided in the atrocities was the Janjaweed, which is now heavily affiliated with the RSF. The UN estimates nearly 25 million people will need assistance this year, with 18 million facing emergency levels of hunger. 6 million are internally displaced, and 1.6 million have crossed into neighboring Central African Republic, Chad, Egypt, Ethiopia, and South Sudan since April 15th. The EU has provided over $200 million in humanitarian funding since the escalation of violence. But rafts of Sudanese asylum seekers are attempting to cross illegally into Europe. Some have drowned. Instability in parts of Africa is fueling what many European countries are calling a migrant crisis, which they've pledged to stem. So why does Sudan appear to be so overlooked?
Well, let's bring in our guests. Joining us from Cairo is Amgad Fareid Eltayeb. He is a visiting fellow at the European Council of Foreign Relations and former Deputy Chief of Staff to the Prime Minister of Sudan, Dr. Abdalla Hamdok. Here with me in the studio is Elbashir Idris. He is a human rights activist and analyst, and Othaylat Suliman, a Sudanese journalist. I'll come to you first, Amgad. I can't actually remember the last time I saw Sudan on the front pages of Western newspapers. Is this conflict in danger of being forgotten?
Thank you. And actually, I think it's already being forgotten amid the many crises that is engulfing the world. And basically, it's reflecting the lack of political seriousness of addressing what's happening in Sudan. Although what's happening in Sudan is not in isolation of what's happening in the whole world. The war in Ukraine has both of its parties involved in the war in Sudan. The presence of Wagner mercenaries fighting alongside the RSF have been documented for many times. As well, the recent visit of the Chadian president, Mohammed to Moscow took place through the same airplane that was used by him to travel around Africa after he fled Khartoum. And it was a Royal Emirati airplane. So the war in Sudan is very much connected to what's happening in the Sahel region, what's happening in the Red Sea, what's happening in the greater Middle East, taking also the Israeli involvement in supporting of the RSF, and also what's happening in Ukraine, taking the Russian support to the RSF militia in Sudan. It's completely unfair, and it's a risk that the world will take dearly for it.
Othaylat, is it too unfair to say that Western countries initially just got their people out of Sudan, and then forgot about the place? Is that an unfair assessment?
Well, I think if you're talking about the media, yes. The interest of the media definitely waned after the evacuation of Western people. And in fact, there was no coverage with the problems encountered with Sudanese who lived in Europe and who were also Americans and their problems of being evacuated. But on the political side, there is engagement, obviously, with Sudan through the European Quartet, Norway, Britain, which is not in the EU anymore, but it's in that process. It was Norway, Britain, Germany, and the USA. There is a political engagement, but no, you do not hear about it, about what's happening. I think we just heard yesterday an announcement by French President Macron of organizing a fundraising for Sudan, given that the UN has appealed for, I think, 1.4 billion for Sudan, of which only 3.5% has actually been pledged so far. The crisis in Sudan actually surpasses a lot of other crises in the world. 1 out of 8 refugees, 1 out of 8 Sudanese are either internally displaced or refugees. Globally, that's like 1 out of 5 refugees now is from Sudan. So the statistics is really, abhorrent.
They're shocking.
Shocking, and yet there isn't enough attention. I mean, when you talk about what's happening now, it's almost as bad as Afghanistan, as bad as, comparable to Yemen, comparable to any other, conflict. But of course, Gaza and Ukraine have more coverage compared to Sudan.
Elbashir, on the human rights side of things in Sudan at the moment, we're seeing 2 very powerful generals fighting a bloody civil war, but it's the population that is really, really being hit hardest.
Well, yes, and today now we're on day 308, and unfortunately on this day it now commemorates 10 months of this war being complete. This is a population of 44 million with the median age of 18 to 19. And as you can see, and as we've seen, or not many people have seen actually, but the ones affected by this especially are the youth as well, and women. Let's not forget, this is a country that had its peaceful revolution back in 2018, 2019, hoping to change the militarized society that the Sudanese people were in. They were ambitious going forward, and they wanted to make the change in their country. Now, ever since this war started and broke out, it essentially killed those dreams. And this is why I see that this war between the generals, it's not only just between generals, but it's against the civilian population of Sudan, and essentially forcing the youth and forcing the next generation to pick up arms, to train in military affairs, to become soldiers, not civilians, which is a very dangerous thing. And it's really reminiscent of the times of the Elbashir dictatorship and other military dictatorships in Sudan. Now, the civilians are taking the most of the hits, or I will say actually all the hits, but also they're the ones who are changing the humanitarian game. What do I mean by that? Because of the responses done by the civilians, they have no internet at this moment of time. We're currently on our 8th day of blackout. The humanitarian access and the humanitarian supplies needed to go into the country has been stalled many times by government entities such as HAC, the Humanitarian Aid Commission, who are playing a kind of politicized aid game. This results in much of the aid that is supposed to go into the country being earmarked for certain places that have better relations with the army, for example. But we also see that on the other side as well with RSF and SAHO and the way they've been capturing aid as well. So the civilians are the ones taking the most hits. However, with the segmentation of Sudan into different areas and factions of controls, the aid that is supposed to be neutral, sent in by neutral parties, are now having to negotiate with these generals and these armies to essentially try to get the most basics in. Now, as Othaylat said, there's only 3.5% of the humanitarian budget has been met this year. I've had the chance of going into Sudan, Port Sudan, after the war broke out, so I can see the humanitarian situation and how they're responding to it. Now, the big problem is the massive disconnection between INGOs, the international non-government organizations, and the local actors on the ground who understand the lay of the land like the back of their hands much better than foreign experts. However, with that massive disconnect, there needs to be a way to bridge this gap to allow INGOs to work directly with the local humanitarian actors, the resistance committees, the emergency response rooms, who have been doing the absolute best to make sure and mitigate the damages we're seeing in Sudan.
Thanks, Elbashir. Amgad, I want to take a look at some stats from the United Nations. They estimate that about 18 million people are facing emergency levels of hunger. That's double the figure from last year. And according to Doctors Without Borders, hunger is killing 2 children every hour in Zamzam displacement camp in North Darfur. I mean, this is a perfect storm of just terribleness, isn't it, from a civilian's point of view?
Sudan is the worst humanitarian crisis all over the world. The number of those who are facing acute levels of severe food shortage is more than the number in Congo and Ukraine combined. It is triple the number in Yemen and 4/4 the number in Palestine. This is the biggest humanitarian crisis of our time. And the international community has been dragging their feet, waiting for a miraculous political solution that may come. And actually, I want to point what Othaylat said, yes, that there is some political engagement from the Western countries, but it's very short, superficial, and it's very shallow. It does not address the problem, and it does not have any enforcement mechanism to whatsoever agreement the two warring parties reach. We saw the Jeddah platform, which was mediated by the Saudis and Americans, signing a cessation of hostilities agreement with the two warring parties 10 times, or more than 10 times, actually 12 times, without any commitment from both sides to it. And as Bashir also said, there is huge politicization for both sides for the humanitarian aid. 8 times the RSF have raided the World Food Program warehouses in Al Jazeera, in Darfur, and in Khartoum, and in other places, leading to the WFP announcing the cessation of its process. The recent storming of Al Jazeera state, which hosts the biggest agricultural scheme of Sudan, led to hindering the farming of more than 1 million acres of agricultural products in Sudan. Sudan is facing a crisis that needs huge humanitarian response, but we yet see no response from the international community.
Thanks, Amjad. Othaylat, as a Sudanese person, how does this make you feel when you're hearing terrible stories about cholera, famine, disease, and young people being not only the issues of avoiding bullets and bombs, but, you know, all that follows from civil war?
Well, actually, it's not just hearing, but I have family in Sudan, so I, first-hand experience of people having to evacuate out of conflict areas, trying to leave Khartoum. The family is now scattered. Some are went to Atbara, Damer, Wadi Halfa, others gone to Egypt, some have gone to the Gulf, and this is a situation with a lot of Sudanese. So we've had I still have a family home in Sudan, which of course has been pillaged. All of my mom's assets in the bank, like a lot of people, have been, also pillaged because of by RSF, and you have, I have people who are still in Khartoum who haven't left. And there is the constant risk of either bombing by SAF, the Sudan Allied Forces, or by RSF, the Rapid Support Forces. So people are being kidnapped off the streets, and those who stay, like for example in the SAF liberated areas, some were accused of being traitors. So it is like a dilemma. If you stay, you're in danger of either being killed or being accused of being a traitor. And if you leave, then it's a question of basically a lot of, no one's received salaries for 10 months. So no schools. This is affecting everyone.
Elbashir, these are harrowing tales that will be multiplied countless millions of times, every family. At what point do you think there could be a situation where the two generals will be forced to sit down, perhaps somewhere like Geneva, to talk peace?
Well, now it's been 10 months, and if it hasn't been anything before that, then what makes us think that it will come soon? If there's famine on the way, there's a massive health crisis. The World Health Organization have said it's a perfect storm for multiple diseases to come in. Clearly, the health and the well-being of the citizens doesn't seem to matter. What seems to matter to these generals is making sure that society is essentially transformed, which they are doing at this moment, and they are extracting the best that they can from the country, plundering it. Now, there's different narratives for this. We can say it's a war between two generals. You can say there's different proxies involved. However, let's admit, for the past 20 years, Burhan and Hemeti, the two generals, have been involved in Darfur. These two men have their own political ambitions and personal ambitions, and to say it's a proxy-only kind of thing absolves them of their agency that they've been pushing. So it seems that these two men are hell-bent on either destroying each other or destroying the Sudanese people. We've had multiple mediations or attempted mediations from Jeddah to Cairo to Amgad.
Have they gone anywhere, these mediations?
They've only just digged the hole even deeper with accusations of different countries and neighboring countries supporting different sides and putting their bets and chips in. So unfortunately, in that sense, how I see it, if they haven't done it before, they will not see a means to do it now. By their understanding and with the way they're using media, it seems that each side wants to show that they have control of their areas and that they don't need to essentially come to a negotiating table. However, that's delusion from these generals, because the real thing that needs to happen is de-escalation. Now, what does de-escalation looks like? Yes, it could be Geneva if that works, but essentially there needs to be a cut of the supplies who are going to these generals. With RSF, let's not forget they're the Janjaweed from 20 years ago who were committing a genocide in Darfur, and they're still continuing with it now, being supplied. And I've personally tracked this myself in terms of arms and weapons and transportations and logistics from the UAE to Sudan through other proxy states, such as Uganda, Chad, which these governments have tried their best to deny and refute. However, we live in an age now where everybody has a mobile phone. They can take a picture, they can put it online, we can verify these things, we can find the location of these things, and we can make sure that and understand what is happening. It is one thing to see what's happening to your country. It's another thing to track it, to see who are the players, and to see what these different players get out of it. And just on that point as well, there's a lot of different ambitions from different neighboring countries. For the past, 10, 15 years, we've been hearing talk of a water resource war. The Nile River is the longest river in the world. This is Ethiopia we're talking about. This is Uganda we're talking about. This is Egypt we're talking about. So there's a lot of different players with different interests for different reasons. So this is why maybe the Sudan war isn't on the news that much, because of the complexities behind it.
Thanks, Elbashir. Amgad, we hear a lot from European Union leaders about migration from Africa. I get the impression they haven't really been paying attention to what's going on in Sudan, because millions and millions of people being displaced, they will surely move north and many of them will want to come to Europe.
The problem of the approach of the European Union in addressing the issue of the irregulated migration that it depends on securitizing the borders. We saw what the Khartoum process that the EU funded in 2014, which is reached up to funding the Rapid Support Forces militia, which is, as Bashir correctly pointed, is just rebranding of the Janjaweed. The EU was happily funding the RSF with drones, with training, with tactical support to fight migration. But this does not solve the problem. Those who are forced to leave their countries and their houses, they are leaving it for a reason. And basically, it is political reasons, and it is now the war that tearing up Sudan. Without addressing the political roots of the crisis inside Sudan, these people will continue to flee for their lives. They are running away from the risk of war. They are fleeing risk of famine, of diseases, of death, basically. And right now, the displacement from Khartoum and from the war-besieged areas is itself a class issue. Those who came out from the war areas to other areas in Sudan or get displaced and became refugees in other countries, until now, they are the upper and middle class. But if this war continue, even those who are PC will be forced to leave the war zones. The EU and the rest of the world need to understand that dealing with the situation with more seriousness in Sudan right now would be less costly and less expensive than allowing the situation and the humanitarian suffering of the people to carry on.
Amgad, thank you. Othaylat, what can be done here?
Well, I think the problem is that trying to only look at the two generals as the source of the solution ignores the Sudanese civilians who were very active also in the revolution and overthrowing Bashir. And I think now there is a new platform, Taqaddum, which is led by the former Prime Minister Hamdok, and it's a coalition of civilian and political parties. Obviously, it's still in the process of formation, and they still have to have a general meeting and to get more people on board. But it's pretty obvious that the problems of Sudan will not only end with a ceasefire or an agreement between the two generals. It is a question of changing the whole political system and a transition to a civilian government, which was basically aborted in 2021 when Burhan had a coup against Hamdok and giving power to the civilian government. We need to perhaps, it's not a question of restarting, because now the situation is even so much worse. You can't even get aid if we do not have a ceasefire. So there has to be a political process to have complete ceasefire that all the Sudanese political parties and civilian government, civilian entities have to put aside their differences, really.
Elbashir, how likely is that? Can they put aside differences and work together for the greater good of the Sudanese people?
Well, as we said, 19 million people, children, are now out of education. That's a whole generation of children out. So essentially, they don't have that ladder to essentially, propel themselves forward in life. Now, with a lost generation, how are we going to move forward with this famine, with this health crisis, with everything going on? If these generals and these armies want to continue, they probably will, but it will come at the massive, massive extreme cost at the future of this country. Now, to see it come to an end, let's say something. So, with your point in ceasefires, from what we've seen, and all of us have seen, they've tried ceasefires in the beginning, they've kept on failing, and the only one time a ceasefire was held was during the evacuations. And that was because the Americans brought in Predator drones and AC-130s, threatening the Sudanese belligerents that they will bomb them if they tried anything else. Now, I'm not saying that further firepower, no violence is the answer, but what is needed is more pressure from the international community, definitely, because it seems that these two generals, with their history over the decades, believe they can operate in impunity and not having any justice.
Thank you so much, Elbashir, Othaylat and Amgad. Thank you all for your insight. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Just search for Roundtable TRT World. And if you like what you see, do hit that subscribe button. But for now, from me and Brady and all of the team here, goodbye and thank you for watching.